Today, we gather to consider S-331, the Halt All Lethal Trafficking in Fentanyl Act, also known by the acronym HALT, Halt Fentanyl Act. This bill does three things. It first makes permanent the class scheduling of fentanyl-related substances. Second, it confirms the sentencing penalties the federal courts have long applied to fentanyl-related substances. This isn't a change in law. It's the way the courts are applying the law today. Finally, the Halt Fentanyl Act relaxes registration requirements for scientists studying Schedule I substances. I've seen some disappointing misinformation spread about Halt Fentanyl Act, so I want to be equally clear about what this bill does not do. Halt Fentanyl does not reschedule or have any impact on legal fentanyl dispensed by medical doctors. Under Halt Fentanyl, patients will have the same access they've always had to fentanyl for medical treatment. The legislation does not increase the mandatory minimums or throw barriers to research. To the contrary, Halt Fentanyl maintains existing penalties and makes it easier for researchers to study Schedule I substances, including fentanyl-related substances. This bill targets illegal fentanyl knockoffs created by the cartels, which creation is able to circumvent U.S. law. It closes those loopholes so that cartels have no incentive to keep creating these deadly substances. As the inventor of class scheduling, Dr. Westlake, told us, quote, "No one can die from ingesting something never created or be incarcerated for trafficking something that does not exist," end of quote. My office has received countless letters from families who have lost loved ones to fentanyl. Many of them urges us to pass Halt Fentanyl without modification or delay. One mother wrote me about watching her son die. She said, quote, "He called me into his room screaming, 'Mom, Mom, I can't breathe.' I entered his room. He was blue. Before I had time, he fell forward onto the floor, face down. He was too heavy for me to turn over to give him CPR," end of quote. Another mother wrote of the moment the police told her that her son had died from fentanyl. She begged them to revive him, only to learn that he was already gone. She wrote, quote, "The scream that came out of my mouth, they say you will never forget, but still replays over and over," end of quote. Another parent described the loss of her son as, quote, "lifetime sentence of pain and grief," end quote. After her first son died because of fake pill made of fentanyl, her second son took his own life because of the unbearable pain of losing his mother. She writes, quote, I may not have my children, but I will definitely have their voices," end quote. I wish I could read aloud every one of the over 80 letters that I've received from parents. That number is substantial, yet it represents just a small fraction of families left broken by this crisis. I want to thank these brave families for writing me. I also want to welcome and thank all the parents who are with us this very day. You all have given us a call to action, and it's past time that we found the will to act. This legislation is a bipartisan solution to fentanyl epidemic. It's co-sponsored by 7 Democrat senators, and 98 Democrat members voted for it when it passed the House of Representatives. Every Republican member on this committee is a co-sponsor of Halt Fentanyl Act. Before I turn it over to Ranking Member Durbin for open remarks, I want to close with a video from several parents who reached out to my office, and it also proves to you I've learned something from Senator Durbin about having videos at these meetings.
Is just one of countless tragedies caused by this epidemic. His story is one of hope extinguished, of a family left broken, but it is also a call to action.
We know that we're losing thousands of American lives every single year to this horrible, horrible chemical. And this includes my 14-year-old son, Alexander.
My son, Jesse Bird, died of fentanyl poisoning on February 16th of 2022.
I lost my 13-year-old son, Luca, to a counterfeit Percocet.
Last week, Dr. Westlake, a very dear friend of mine, testified in front of all of you and talked about a boy named Archie, and that was my son.
I lost my son, Austin Babcock, January 26th of 2019. Honestly, sitting here making this video, I think it's a sad day in America when us families, the bereaved families, have to make a video like this.
Please keep this bill clean. Do not attach any amendments to him. We need action, and we need it now.
Please pass the Halt Fentanyl Act without amendments to get to President Trump's desk.
Pass the Halt Fentanyl Act to protect our country's future.
There's been a continuous delay of the piece of legislation that could be saving thousands of lives.
Keep it clean. Enough's enough.
We need fentanyl-related substances permanently scheduled.
Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Chairman Grassley. I'm going to make an opening statement on a different topic and then speak to the pending legislation. On Monday, President Trump posted a social media quote. He said, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." In another social media post, Vice President Vance falsely claimed, "Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power." When he's not blocking life-saving funding that Congress has authorized, Elon Musk, the eminent screes of MAGA, has also been posting threatening messages about judges for his 218 million followers. Musk has repeatedly called for impeachment of federal judges, and he recently tweeted, and I quote, "The notion of having a judge job for life, no matter how bad the judgments, is ridiculous." These claims by the President, the Vice President, Elon Musk, are not amusing. They are a danger to our Constitution. The Trump administration's unlawful actions, from mass layoffs of civil servants to blocking funds Congress appropriated, pose a serious threat to our constitutional order and the separation of powers. Since the landmark case of Marbury versus Madison, decided in 1803, there has been a broad bipartisan consensus that, in the words of Chief Justice Marshall, it is emphatically the province and duty of the Judicial Department to say what the law is. The Trump administration's serial violations of the law are not only a challenge to the judicial branch, they also challenge us, Congress, the Article 1 branch, in ways we have never seen before. Under Article 1 of the Constitution, it's our responsibility to write the laws. And under Article 2, it's the executive branch's responsibility to take care of the laws be faithfully executed. No one can seriously claim that President Trump is taking care to faithfully execute the law. Let me give you one example. Last month, President Trump summarily fired 18 inspector generals. A law authored by our chairman, clearly stated, and I quote, "The President shall communicate to Congress in writing 30 days before removing an Inspector General the, quote, substantive rationale, including detailed and case-specific reasons for the removal." President Trump violated this law. More than 3 weeks ago, Chairman Grassley and I sent the President a letter asking for a lawfully required rationale. We are still waiting for a response. We are also witnessing an unprecedented assault on the Department of Justice. Dozens of career officials, not political appointees, career officials at the Justice Department and the FBI have been fired, and thousands of additional FBI personnel have been targeted simply for doing what they were assigned to do, investigate the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and now they're being investigated for that. At the same time, Trump political appointees are already weaponizing the Justice Department's vast law enforcement resources for nakedly partisan reasons. Acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove, one of our former defense attorneys of President Trump, serving in senior Justice Department roles, ordered the dismissal of the prosecution of the New York City Mayor Eric Adams in exchange for the mayor's cooperation with the Trump immigration agenda. In response, several attorneys resigned, including the acting U.S. attorney, a staunch Federalist Society conservative who has clerked for Justice Scalia, appointed by President Trump, stood her ground and refused to agree. My Democratic colleagues on the committee and I have requested an Inspector General investigation of this sordid incident, underscoring the danger of a weaponized Department of Justice under the new administration. The prospect of an FBI director who is an unprincipled loyalist of the president and untethered from the rule of law heightens that danger. Today, the Senate will vote on Kash Patel's confirmation. It is an opportunity for the Senate to fulfill its constitutional duty and preserve the rule of law. Mr. Patel's record demonstrates he's a dangerous political operative who would not serve as should not serve as the next FBI director. Mr. Patel has been crystal clear that he plans to use the FBI's vast surveillance and investigative authority to, quote, come after, close quote, the president's enemies. I hope I am wrong, but I believe that my Republican colleagues will quickly come to regret any support for Mr. Patel. FBI agents have come to us privately as whistleblowers and told us the terrible decline in morale at the FBI. This is the first presidential transition with such a purge, and it certainly has had its impact on these men and women who have dedicated their lives to our safety. I suspect the time will come soon when we'll all fully appreciate the importance of a legislature and a judiciary independent of the executive. Now on the bill before us. In just a decade, fentanyl has emerged as the deadliest drug in American history. All it takes is 2 milligrams, fraction of the size of a penny, to cause an overdose. There is an overdose crisis in the United States, but we've learned that evidence-based solutions reduce deaths. In fact, in 2023, overdose deaths actually decreased for the first time since 2018 by 10%, more than 10%. We need to look at every factor that contributed to this reduction: counseling and treatment, training for first responders, naloxone, and other things. I appreciate the hard work of the sponsors of this bill we're considering. We all agree that the Halt Fentanyl Act will not by itself keep our communities safe. Our law enforcement agencies are on the front line of the fight to protect Americans, and there are other things we have learned. Just the other day we had a testimony of Mr. Pizarro, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, from New Jersey, who's on our panel, who talked about the incidence of fentanyl and where it came from. We did a little research after some of his statements. The National Crime Prevention Council estimates that 80% of teen and young adult fentanyl poisoning can be traced to social media. Your heartbreaking witnesses this morning, mothers and parents who've lost a kid being a teenager, 80% of the time likely attributable to social media, which means, in my mind, that we ought to consider that as part of the solution to reducing fentanyl use. Politically motivated purges of senior law enforcement at DOJ and the FBI diminishes our ability to hold traffickers accountable and cut off the supply of fentanyl. So we need to make sure that this remains a priority in terms of our activity and funding. Getting fentanyl off the streets is a Herculean task that will require us all to put politics aside and across the aisle work to make this a bipartisan effort. I yield.
Yeah, thank you. We'll now turn to the Halt Fentanyl Act. I'd like to offer a manager's amendment, 25160. This manager's amendment corrects a typo in the underlying text. As I noted at the outset of this meeting, the Halt Fentanyl Act does three things. First, it makes permanent the class scheduling of fentanyl-related substances. Secondly, confirms the existing sentencing framework for those substances. And finally, it relaxes research requirements for Schedule I substances. I move the adoption of the manager's amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. The majority of the members present having voted in affirmative, the ayes have it in the manager's amendment. Now we will turn to whoever wants to offer first-degree amendments.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I call as my amendment, amendment number OLL 25184. I want to say at the outset, as this amendment is being distributed, that Senator Graham and I have addressed this 230 issue directly together on a bipartisan basis, and others have joined us. I say to Senator Graham, I'm offering this amendment, but I want to engage you in dialogue as to how we approach this. I think we are at a moment where we can hope for achieving a bipartisan support for this effort. I don't believe we can deal with fentanyl effectively if we don't deal with what's going on social media. When 80% of the young children who are victims of fentanyl use social media, let's be very honest about this. We've got to deal with this and do it directly. Time and again, social media people have made an excuse after excuse that they really do want to cooperate with us, but they're never there when we need them. We've got to move forward directly on this and include it in this effort. I think Halt Fentanyl, if it's serious, is going to include social media, and that's why I offered this amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn. Wait, Senator Cornyn, did you want him to respond?
Go ahead. I'll speak after John.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I want to speak about, excuse me, all the amendments that are being offered by Democratic colleagues today. We can all agree about the importance of this legislation, although I would say that it would be maybe even more important than passing new laws for our Democratic colleagues to join with us in securing the border. We know where fentanyl comes from. The chemical precursors come from China. They make their way to Mexico, where they're then manufactured into counterfeit-looking pharmaceuticals that are then result in the lost lives of last year 107,000 people, and nearly 70% of those overdoses can be attributed to fentanyl. Last year we got some good news with regard to the overall figures, but those numbers are deceptive. The reason is carfentanil, a fentanyl-related substance that is 100 times more potent than fentanyl, has reemerged in the illicit drug supply chain. It's still rare, but the CDC tells us that the overdose deaths involving carfentanil increased 7-fold starting in mid-2023. If carfentanil further infiltrates the drug supply, we could see a substantial increase in overdose deaths. That's why it's so important that we urgently, permanently schedule fentanyl-related substances and do it today. Our colleagues have circulated a number of amendments, some of which may be actually constructive. As chairman of the Senate Caucus on International Narcotics Control and as a member of this committee, I stand ready to work with anyone who has a good idea about how we can fight the scourge of fentanyl. Of course, as I said at the beginning, that could have started with bipartisan efforts to secure the border and prevent the supply, or at least to slow it down significantly, which unfortunately has not happened. The bill we're marking up today is already battle tested in the House of Representatives in its current form. It passed 289 to 133. Our partners in law enforcement, including the National Association of Police Organizations, the National HIDA Directors Association, the Major County Sheriffs of America, the Major City Chiefs Association, the National Sheriffs Association, and the National District Attorneys Association, and others have urged us to pass the bill immediately and without modification. I fear that offering even well-intended amendments to the bill will slow down this extremely important legislation, and I share the concerns of our law enforcement partners. So I encourage all of my colleagues to oppose all amendments and to vote out the Halt Fentanyl Act out of committee today. I would say, Mr. Chairman, that does not preclude our cooperation on other ideas that Senator Durbin and others may have about how we can further address the scourge of fentanyl. But I think slowing down this bill by changing it from what has been passed in the House, and we know how difficult it is with the thin margins in the House for anything to get done, slowing this bill down I think is a problem and something we ought to avoid. Again, that does not preclude us from working together on other ideas that our Democratic colleagues may have. So I would urge all of my colleagues to vote against all of the amendments and to pass this legislation without further modification.
Senator Durbin want to engage with Senator Graham on this?
I'd like to invite Senator Graham to respond.
Thank you very much. Senator Welch mentioned to me yesterday about maybe joining the 230 effort. I think if we had a vote, it would pass overwhelmingly the idea of repealing or sunsetting Section 230. And Senator Durbin, I want to give you a lot of credit. You've joined with me and others to push this. The time is coming. I agree with what Senator Cornyn said. Let's pass halt fentanyl now. But I will say this. If you don't control the border, you really can't halt fentanyl. And if you don't deal with social media, you really can't halt fentanyl. I agree with everything you're saying here. So let's go ahead and get it scheduled the right way. Then, Senator Grassley, I don't want to speak for you, but we talked about that you would be supportive of reforming Section 230.
Reforming or repeal, whatever we can work out.
Whatever we can work out.
So instead of having 5 bills out of this committee, we can have 1 bill?
Yeah.
I hope.
See, open-minded as you get. I hope we can have 1 bill. So Section 230 repeal is coming. It's coming out of Judiciary. It's going to be overwhelmingly bipartisan support. Halt fentanyl is coming out of Judiciary. I don't know if it'll be bipartisan or not. We need to marry up with House, as Senator Cornyn said. So my position is, let's not mix these two concepts. Let's focus on the task at hand, Senator Durbin. I promise you my full, complete support to get Section 230 repealed or sunsetted, and that's where I'm at.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, you and I have a trusting relationship, and I respect you very much. And if you give me an assurance that we will have a hearing and markup on the repeal of Section 230 as quickly as possible, I think it's an urgent issue. I will withdraw my amendment.
I think I started that process yesterday when we had the hearing that we had, and I have been quoted over a period of 2 or 3 years about voting for repeal or voting for some modification of it, and I want to get a large share of this committee behind 1 bill if we can.
That's good enough for me. I withdraw the amendment.
Okay. And I just, one last thought. Thank you to all the people on this committee. Mr. Duffy spoke yesterday. He was from South Carolina. His son, Gavin, was in a sexting relationship who he thought to be a young woman, wound up to be a gang in Nigeria, and killed himself. And I don't know who it was. Maybe it was him. He said that social media is really big tobacco. It needs to be regulated. It needs to be held accountable. So I talked to that we're going to not let your son die in vain. They've caught one of the people involved in the Nigerian gang. And this is a practice all over the country where they get young people into these relationships and basically extort them. Instead of giving money, this young man killed himself because of the fear of what would be coming his way. And there's not a damn thing we can do about it right now other than find the guy in Nigeria who will be replaced tomorrow. You want to end this? Hold the websites accountable that allow this to happen. That day is coming.
We're going to have other amendments offered, but I'm going to call on Senator Kennedy first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree that we should address Section 230, but I hope, Mr. Chairman, that you and our ranking member, as you always are, will be very inclusive. This is a very complicated subject, and it has constitutional implications. It has practical implications. And I hope we'll spend a requisite amount of time getting it right, considering everybody's ideas, because I appreciate my friend and colleague, Senator Graham's enthusiasm. But this is not going to be easy. The social media companies are going to bring fresh hell. You know it, and I know it. They're going to unleash their version of hell. So we need to get it right and all be on the same page before we do this. In my opinion, for what it's worth.
Senator Whitehouse.
First, let me join the chorus in favor of 230 repeal. I'm hoping that bill will be heavily bipartisan with significant membership, sponsorship on both sides of the aisle, and that starts a process for review here, and I'm delighted to be a part of that. Second, I was prepared to offer an amendment, which I will not offer, but I'd like to speak to it for a moment, which is regarding the work of the Task Force Klepto Capture in the Department of Justice, the Kleptocracy Team, and the Kleptocracy Asset Recovery Initiative. All of that was work generated out of this committee in bipartisan fashion. And all of it has been stopped under this administration. The reason, among many, that is a mistake in the context of a fentanyl bill is that the kleptocracy work goes after the financial system, the dark economy that supports international criminals. And while it's very important, and as a U.S. attorney and as an attorney general, I did the interdiction of inbound substances that were illegal, it's just as important to interdict the money flowing back, and particularly to target the systemic dark money, dark economy systems in other countries and in various places, even in our country, where criminals and kleptocrats can hide their money. This has been extremely bipartisan. Mr. Chairman, you've been very involved in this and very helpful. Senator Graham has been very involved in this and very helpful. Senator Kent Cornyn has been involved in this. It has been a focus of the Anti-Narcotics Committee here in Congress, which I'm the ranking member of now and have chaired. So my amendment would have urged the department, make it a sense of the Senate that they should restore that work. I just want to make that point here. I will not offer the amendment, but I do want to make that point. And I want to speak in favor of a Booker amendment very briefly. We are not chemists here, Mr. Chairman, and we are entering an area in which we are not expert. It may very well prove that there are benign substances, perhaps even helpful substances in terms of addiction treatment and research that get swept up in the definitions dragnet of this bill. I think there should be an escape hatch, an exit for substances that have been proven to be benign. And Senator Booker's OLL 25213 would allow that. I know that the committee is in a great rush to move this along, but to quote Senator Kennedy, it is important that we provide a requisite amount of time getting it right. I think this amendment of Senator Booker's helps us get it right. And because of the manager's amendment, this bill has to go back over to the House anyway. So we might as well amend it because it's going back. And if the amendments are sensible and non-controversial, as I believe Senator Booker's would be, no harm done. It'll get passed just as fast. Has to go back for your amendment, your manager's amendment. We can add to it without any delay to the proceedings if people think that it's sensible. And I think we should, because I think for folks who are involved in trying to manage recovery and treatment for people who are in opioid addiction, to interfere with that research could be a very dangerous and unnecessary collateral harm to getting this done. So I speak in favor of Senator Booker's amendment when he has the chance to bring it up.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask Senator a question?
Yeah.
I wonder if the senator has any examples.
At this point, no, because the research is ongoing. But if you look at the manner in which drugs that support treatment, medication-assisted treatment, which you and I have worked on together to help people get out of prison, get out of medication-assisted treatment, and get back into their communities, I wouldn't want to foreclose that. So what the amendment, in my view, would do is be to say, if you can show that the substance is benign, then you can go ahead with the research and you can go ahead with the treatment. Everything else, the default is this stuff is scheduled and there are penalties for trafficking in it. The exemption would be if it can be shown to be benign, and it just leaves that opportunity. And I think I don't want to speak any further on Senator Booker's amendment. I think he can defend it.
I don't want to speak to the amendment. I want to speak to the question that was asked about one. Is there an example? I direct the senators to the FDA's testimony before explicitly said, because of the chemical substances we're talking about, changing one thing could present an antagonist that could actually help save lives. And in addition to that, the antagonists we know that work, there's at least one example, my team is telling me, of where that was the case. We all share the exact same goals here. We all share the exact same urgency. Thousands have been killed in my state. This is a common sense, non-controversial, science-backed idea. And again, I direct the senator to the testimony from our own FDA that explicitly said this could actually undermine our ability to find antagonists that could help save lives.
Would you
Well,
like
Mr. Chairman, can I respond briefly?
Yes, you can.
Well, the fact that it could happen doesn't mean that it will happen. And I would just say that if there is actually some science, and Senator Whitehouse pointed out, none of us here are experts in pharmacology or chemistry or any appropriate science. So, but if there is some proven usefulness, a benign use, to use Senator Whitehouse's terminology, then there's no reason we couldn't modify this at a later date. But to leave a huge gap in the coverage, or leave some question maybe for the courts to have to litigate, I think is not wise at this point. If there's some discovered usefulness from some analog or some other derivative of this of the chemistry of this drugs we're talking about, then we can modify the law once that evidence is presented to us and we're satisfied that it's based on sound science.
Senator Booker, would you like to offer your amendment now?
No, sir, I won't. I'm going to patiently wait.
Okay.
I would offer a correction, though. Senator Coons actually is a trained chemist.
Well, I took organic chemistry in college. Does that count?
I see Senator Coons' light is on. You want to...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could briefly, although I did train as an undergraduate in chemistry, I'm not an expert in any way in psychopharmacology. And I believe every one of us, am gravely concerned about the fentanyl crisis that has taken the lives of thousands of Delawareans and far too many Americans for far too long, and we owe them a strong and coordinated response. It is important that we keep in mind the issue addressed by this bill is just a small part of the overall much greater crisis. And I've worked with Senator Cornyn last year on a bill that would clarify the legality of fentanyl test strips, and another bill serializing pill press machines. There are lots of other things we can and should do together. Of the thousands of federal fentanyl prosecutions, just a few hundred are for analogs, but analogs are worth our understanding, studying, and addressing in a balanced way. I agree with the need for fentanyl class-wide scheduling. I don't think it makes sense for law enforcement to have to play a game of whack-a-mole where cartels can keep generating new analogs faster than they can be scheduled. But it's important to appreciate that that's not the norm. Typically, substances are controlled only after science-based testing and analysis by the DEA and HHS of each individual substance to understand the impact said substance, either harmful or therapeutic, has on the body. And the Biden administration developed thoughtful recommendations 4 years ago to balance these competing challenges. Permanent class-wide scheduling coupled with an off-ramp that allowed for studying and potentially rescheduling analogs. Both sides of the political spectrum were critical of these recommendations, but for opposite reasons, and I frankly thought the balance mostly got it right. I worked with several colleagues, I think Senators Heinrich and Cassidy, to see if we could get some bipartisan agreement on the off-ramp. We put in a lot of hard work, but never quite got there. I have filed an amendment with the latest working draft that we developed together, which I thought balanced the issues at stake. I will not bring it up for a vote today because I know the support is frankly not here on this committee. But I hope that we will look to this work in the future, as Senator Cornyn just brought up, as synthetics continue to be developed, and as we confront the need for us to strike the right balance. Last, let me speak to another of Senator Booker's amendments. This is 25212, which promotes transparency and reporting. It strikes me as reasonable, and I support it. Disclosure of the identification of and testing status of fentanyl-related substances can help private researchers identify research targets for potential therapeutics and further our scientific understanding of this complex field that may include hundreds, if not thousands, of analogs in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Who wants to recognize? Senator Welch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to bring up Amendment BOM 25106.
Proceed.
This is the test strip amendment. The amendment would help prevent drug overdoses and deaths by allowing much needed access to the life-saving test strips. This is about saving lives. Okay, and those test strips are widely used to detect fentanyl, xylazine, and other fentanyl additives. I mentioned they're widely used throughout the country because they work. Last year, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine announced that his office would distribute 1 million fentanyl test strips throughout Ohio. And these test strips have been used in states from Alabama to Vermont. And we've legalized these test strips for fentanyl. It's about saving lives. You get the information you need to provide the medical information as quickly as possible. And I see this as facilitating the goal all of us have, which includes saving lives from people who are suffering from a fentanyl overdose, as well as the heart of this bill is to try to restrict what fentanyl gets in the communities. So I offer that amendment for the consideration of the committee.
I would like to give a response to you in opposition to your amendment. First of all, I think it takes decision to legalize test strips out of states' hands. The states are grappling with whether to legalize test strips, and we ought to let them work through that process. Another reason is that test strips are not 100% accurate. They may provide a false sense of security, and some users may even use them to seek out the very drug that may kill them. We have our own Center for Disease Control under the Biden administration cautioning that test strips may not identify some fentanyl knockoffs. So I would ask my committee to vote against the amendment. Can we go ahead, Senator Kennedy?
I have a question of the senator. Senator, could you put a little more meat on this bone? How will your amendment improve this bill? And I understand what a test strip is, but I don't understand the application of it.
Well, I think there's two things. One, there's the thrust of this bill, which is to have other analog substances included in the scheduling. There's also, with every fentanyl bill that we have, a desire to save lives. You know, and this test strip has been used in so many of our states with the effect of saving lives from people who are suffering from a fentanyl overdose. So it's supplemental, Senator, and not interfering with the basic core of the bill. That's how I see it.
What do they use the test strip for, if you don't mind me asking?
I have a fentanyl overdose. The test strip is then used by medical folks to determine what it is. Like, for instance, Senator Scott and I were really concerned about xylazine. That was like one of the new additives that popped up and was really adding to the suffering that people had. How do you know what it is that a person is suffering from can be relevant to what medical intervention is provided? And as you know, the medical intervention is sooner better than later. In fact, if it's not soon, oftentimes it'll result in a fatality.
And that's not legal?
It's not necessarily legal. States, as the senator, as our chairman has indicated, states have been making decisions about using test strips. And most states, I believe, do use test strips. Ohio's a great example of a Republican-led state where they've distributed across the state 1 million test strips for the purpose of allowing folks to save lives. That's really what it boils down to.
Why wouldn't a state use a test strip?
You'd have to ask the states that don't use test strips.
Mr. Chairman, can I add some clarity to the questions that Mr. Kennedy is asking?
Please go ahead.
So just to add some additional thing, it's not just after the drug has been taken, which is vital for emergency responders to know what's there. It's actually used by people who are using drugs to test their drug beforehand. This is what's called something that we have both on both sides of the aisle have agreed on, which is this idea of harm reduction. And you see this now common sense. People who are using drugs, who use test strips to see, am I really taking an Adderall or whatever the drug that, again, is illegal. But we have done things in other areas in a bipartisan way around these issues. Law enforcement, with a clarion call, a voice on both sides of the aisle, are saying that these save lives. The medical community says these save lives. There is testimony before Congress about test strips saving lives. And this is one of those common sense, bipartisan efforts that could improve this bill, that could help us as a committee save more lives. And so this is one of those things I think is just so obvious. And again, with the knowledge that we all have, this has to go back to the House. This is not just like us passing this bill and it's done. It has to go back to the House. And there is a large bipartisan support for test strips in the House of Representatives. If our goal here, in the face of this scourge, is to save as many lives as possible, why wouldn't we? What is the argument against doing this?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Kennedy. And then I'll
well, I think we all know what's going on here. We've been asked on my side to oppose all amendments. I get it. But this bill's got to go to the floor. And this bill's got to go back to the House. And maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see the problem with this amendment. And I would hope that once the bill comes out of committee, maybe we could use this as a model to prepare for our work on Section 230. we could sit down and talk about some of these amendments as opposed to just summarily all amendments can't consider. Now, I'm not the expert that some of you are, and this isn't my legislation, I'm on the bill, but there may be a reason not to do this amendment. But it sounds perfectly reasonable to me.
Senator Kennedy, March 31st is the day that.
Can't hear.
Can't hear you, sir.
I think you turned your mic on, Mr. Chairman.
I just wasn't speaking into the mic. It's on. March 31st comes and the temporary or short-term scheduling of this drug runs out. And so I'd like to get this bill passed and get it to the president as fast as we can. You're talking about maybe adding 230 to it.
No. I misspoke.
And speaking, we ought to be willing to look at this amendment, but does it have to be on this bill when March 31st is such an important date and everything that Congress has to do between now and then? Senator Moody.
Thank you, Chairman. And I was just going to point that out. You know, we're not only dealing with a clock here in terms of the expiration of the temporary scheduling. I just want to point out that, you know, I have heard, why are we rushing? No harm done if we wait. We all have the same sense of urgency. I don't know that that is the case. I mean, in the last Congress, this was a topic of conversation because we are losing over 100,000 people a year to drug overdose. And just to put that in perspective, when we were dealing with this crisis in the 80s, when Nancy Reagan first said, just say no, and it was a crisis, we were losing 3,000 a year. We lose over 100,000 people a year, the majority of those to fentanyl. Law enforcement across this nation is begging for this bill. National organizations, state organizations, the DEA under Biden was saying we need to permanently schedule fentanyl-related substances and pass the Halt Fentanyl Act. We cannot wait, and I appreciate all of these concerns you're addressing. Why are we rushing this? No need to hurry. Well, there is a need to hurry. There was a need to hurry in the 118th Congress, but this committee never brought it up. And I can tell you, as an attorney general, going around the state, hugging the parents that lost children over and over and over, and them asking why nothing had been done nationwide on the problem that is killing the most working age and fighting age Americans at a rate we have never seen in the history of our nation. And when world leaders are using the topic as negotiating leverage, they know that what they are doing or not doing is affecting lives in our country. We have to do something. It's our responsibility, and not just do something at some point in time after we lose hundreds of thousands of more people, right now. And if you mean what you say when you say we share the same sense of urgency, stop offering amendments and let's get this passed. It should have been done last Congress. And you hear the pleas of the mothers. They want us to pass something. I implore you, please, let's pass out of this committee a clean bill. Let's all get on the same page, not just as a former attorney general or as your new colleague, but as a mother who has a teenage son dealing with this with their his friends and all throughout the state of Florida. Let's vote this out. And I would urge you not to vote in support of amendments to this bill.
Kennedy, I'll get to you, Senator Durbin.
I'd just like to clarify one thing for my colleague from Florida. At no time during the past 4 years did this law not apply. We have extended it on a temporary basis 6 times. So there's been coverage. This is making it permanent, but it's the same protection that was offered during that same period of time on a temporary basis.
Senator Kennedy.
Look, my colleague from Florida is passionate about this, and she makes very good points. My only point is, number one, this bill's going back to the House. Okay. Number two, I agree with everything the senator says. I don't believe that Nancy Reagan would say no to test strips. Makes sense to me. But I would suggest respectfully and gently, Mr. Chairman, not to tell you how to do your job, if you could sit down with our colleagues and see if there's some way to add this amendment amendment on the floor if it makes sense. Now, maybe I'm not getting the whole story, but that's the only point I'm making. I'm not trying to slow it up. I just want to get the damn thing right.
Mr.
And I
Chairman.
don't understand why test strips aren't a good thing.
Okay.